Welcome to JLive. I'm Laura Mandel, JArt's Executive Director, and it's great to be with you for JLive, our virtual series of bite-sized conversations about Jewish life and art with the best artists with Boston connections. Today, I'm with visual artist Joel Moskowitz. Welcome, Joel.
Hello, Laura. It's great to be here on JLive.
We're so happy to be with you because I will tell you all, I actually fell in love with Joel's work years ago when I first experienced his library card art at the gallery at Mayim Chaim, and we will look at that in a little bit. Today is also a special segment because we are talking about Tu B'Shvat, the Jewish birthday of the trees, which is a perfect fit with Joel's work. So if you have questions during the conversation, please put them in the Q&A function below, and we'll answer as many of them as time allows. So Joel, let's start by looking at this piece of yours called Pear that just struck me so strongly when I first looked at it. And you said that this is one of the first pieces you ever made in a series of Jewish blessings. So tell us about this piece and where it came from.
I made this during a time in my life when I was really falling in love again with being Jewish. And we belonged to a Reform temple. We had small children, and I was very grateful for a lot of things. And influenced by our rabbi, Lawrence Kushner, who was a very smart, intuitive, creative thinker, and had a book that he made called The Book of Hebrew Letters. And I wanted to use my art to make something Jewish. I always felt that that was something that would be good for me to do because of the way I was brought up. My parents always said, contribute to the Jewish people somehow, find your way to do that. And so for the first time, I embraced the Hebrew blessings. Of course, I already knew the basic ones, like the blessing over wine and over bread. But I decided to do this series. And in doing so, it was a time for me to learn a lot. Because there are a lot of esoteric blessings I didn't know. Now, this particular blessing for the fruit of the tree was one of the first in my series. And I remember I took it to our rabbi to kind of get his blessing for the series. And he said, Joel, what you have to do is learn Hebrew calligraphy. Find a font that you love and just go over it over again and again, because what you've done here, these letters are made up, they're designed letters. Each one I designed, but they're not done with a calligraphy pen. So he encouraged me to standardize the series, and I taught myself the font, which is called Torah font, and the others are done in that style. But this is one of the earliest ones in the series.
It's really beautiful, Joel, and I was taken by it just because of the detail in it. But then you told me the story. What you haven't yet shared with us is that you came to Reform Judaism sort of in your 30s, I understand, but you actually grew up in a way that I would define almost more as conservadox. So tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how you think that informed your trajectory as an artist.
Okay, Laura, I've been thinking a lot about that leading up to our conversation. I grew up in a household that was very rich with Jewish culture and observance. We loosely observed the Sabbath, and we belonged to a conservative temple. My parents, especially my father, had been more religious in his youth, and we had large extended family parties on Hanukkah at our house. But what's most interesting is that my parents settled from Milwaukee to California, Long Beach, California, where they raised us. And we lived in a neighborhood that was almost all Christian. And so despite the fact that we were told how we were the chosen people and we had this rich family life at home, in my secular world, I felt a minority, of course, and part of my upbringing and my formative years were based on trying to understand that dichotomy, and it influenced my art later too.
Wow. And so I think with that as a perfect segue, the next pieces we have to show are a piece that a series you created that's Hebrew and Arabic letters side by side that I just find fascinating. So would you tell us a little bit about these beautiful images that we're looking at?
Well, I made these at a time when I was very frustrated, which I still am, about the state of relationship between Israeli Jews and Arabs and Palestinians, and I was in my teenage years, I felt very idealistic about Israel, and it seemed like a great country, and I felt very positive about it. But things seemed to be deteriorating among the people who lived there, and this series is a yearning on my part for coexistence. So I blended in each one a Hebrew letter with an Arabic letter, a corresponding Arabic letter, by which I mean, for example, the one on the right is a nun, and the Arabic version of the nun, a nun, and they are blending with each other, but they're distinct from each other, and they are metaphors for getting along, and that's what the series is about.
They're really beautiful. Tell us a little bit more about how you made these.
Well, these are acrylic paintings on paper. They're about 30 inches tall, and I used stencils to make sure I didn't go out of lines, to keep the paper nice and neat. And the one on the left, I also collaged some pieces of paper and a lot of buttons onto it, and other just materials, just to make it interesting.
I mean, Joel, I'm just so taken by this series because I think this simplicity is really the brilliance of these. And I love how you just shared the story about how you came to make these. I also know that there's really a personal element to this with your parents and your father's role in the creation of the state of Israel. Can you tell us a little bit more about your family in family's involvement with Israel and how that maybe also gave you a little extra motivation to be thinking about coexistence?
Well, this series is really, for me, a moment of self-actualization, because my parents were very powerful. My father died about 6 years ago. My mother is still alive, but they're very powerful people, and right-wing Zionists. And I was brought up with a lot of teaching by them, and it was hard for me to express myself. I was a little bit, it wasn't until I was an older adult that I was able to make a statement through art. And this is really the only art that I've made that has an overt statement. All my art makes, there is a statement to it, but this, I specifically have something to say. And so through art, I was able to say something which contradicts, I think, what it adds a layer and perhaps contradicts what their philosophy is, which is based mostly on Jewish survival and defense and the strength of Israel. Those would be what they would be. They would emphasize those things, whereas I would emphasize things like coexistence and love. Those would be the words that I would relate more to.
I think it's pretty amazing and special that you were able to take these feelings and conflict within yourself, having come from your family, and express it visually so beautifully. I think that's really impressive.
Thank you. Well, we all have to do embrace what is our destiny, and you know, try to find what's right for us, and we all do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so let's move into some of your work that you've done with wood and trees, because as I mentioned, this week is Tu B'Shvat, the birthday of the trees, and I just love that so much of your work is about trees and nature and even recycling. So will you show us, or we have some images of some of your wood-based work that I would love for us to look at and walk through those a little bit.
Okay, so these are sculptures that are made out of roots from trees. And it's a departure for me. I made these just recently. We built a house a couple years ago, and in doing so, bulldozed some trees to make exposure for our roof. And after we lived here, I would walk in the backyard and find these supple, beautiful roots sticking up out of the ground. And I was at a point in my artistic practice where I wasn't sure what to do. And I was influenced by other artists who use found things, including my own wife, who's not a professional artist, but is very creative and creates things out of things like found plastic bags and things like that. And I decided I was really into these roots. So the one on the left, I just gathered a bunch of roots. I nailed them down to a painting, and I added hardware like screws and screw eyes to build it up into that shape. It's a big lump of roots. The one on the right there is a shelf that has tapered roots. When you have a little tree with a root ball, the roots emanate from the root ball, and they are tapered like tusks or teeth. And so I gathered a bunch of them, and I just admired them, and I related to them. So I tried to get some that varied from one another, and put them in a line like that, much like a writer would create a line of poetry or make a statement in some way that evokes something. And that's all it is, really. Now, what's interesting about it also is that they're not glued in. You can take each one of those out and hold it and turn it around and put it back in facing another direction if you want.
Oh, that's very cool. So it's actually interactive in some way.
Yep.
Very cool.
And this one on the right, I call a wreath of 1,000 arcs. And it's like the other ones we talked about. It's those tree roots, and I had so many of them that I found. And this one, I just kept building and building and building, much like you build a log cabin. They're parallel structure, or to me, it's like a log cabin or something weird, like maybe a house that you could live in outer space or something like that. And the one on the left is a tree. I call it the lollipop tree. And what's interesting there is that those balls and discs I carved out of wood that was left over from our house construction. So it's found objects, both natural and, all natural, of course, but wood that is both found on the ground and found during our house construction. And I just put it all together those are different woods. They range from buckthorn to rhododendron and maple, all sorts of woods, and that's what that one is.
That's really beautiful. And I just have to note,
Mm-hmm.
since I realized this before, that we are looking at the same wreath, both in the image and behind you. And I have to note, I am so taken by the fact that you created this wreath with such incredible Jewish symbolism, this idea of the circle and the life cycle, and everything in Judaism is these circles. And yet when I hear the word wreath, I tend to think of Christmas. And so I love that you've kind of reclaimed this concept of a wreath. Tell us a little bit about what I see inside of the version behind you.
Well, okay, I don't know if you can see it very well. Good. I call it the blue eye, and it's a disc of wood surrounded by two curved pieces of root, and it's hanging in there. I was influenced in doing this by Facebook, actually, their blue logo, and the idea that we're always being watched through our devices. And I made a couple of these eyes. I have this vision of perhaps assembling them, gathering them as a kind of group show. But ultimately, I realized later that I was also influenced by the idea of a hamsa, one of those eyes in a hand that come from the Middle East, and we think of them as being protective. So it's just, I don't know, I just got into making these eyes as a kind of simple thing to do. And I put it in the middle of that wreath there, not being sure what the relationship is between the circle and the eye, but it seems to like to be in there. So it is now.
Joel, I love the look and I love the meaning, and I'm having these visions of them hanging from trees in the like studios without walls exhibit that Betty and Libby does. I mean, they're really interesting and beautiful.
Thank you, Laura.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, okay, it's amazing how fast 20 minutes goes by. We're about out of time, but I want to talk about two more pieces. So first, I want to talk about your library cards, because as I mentioned up at the top, I just fell in love with your work when I saw these. I thought they were the most clever thing. So tell us what we're looking at.
Again, this is found art in a different way, though. This was an earlier series, and these were done about 10 years ago. I had a friend who was a librarian in Framingham of a children's library, and she came to me and said, "Joel, we're going digital, and I have all these library catalog cards, and I don't know what to do with them, but you're an artist, maybe you can figure out what to do." So she actually gave me thousands of them, and I didn't know what to do at first, but after they sat on the floor of my studio for literally a couple years until I figured out by looking at them, each one told a story that was not necessarily the story of the book, but a story that I could find myself. So in this case, as you can see, I've created a sentence, what is a book? And then there's a question mark above. But I've found that sentence by just searching the text until I found words that go together. And I illustrated it by making a rocket, and then I collaged things on it. And those things I've collaged on are from a dictionary from 1954. So that I cut up an old dictionary that another friend gave me. And it seemed appropriate to illustrate the catalog cards in this way.
It's so clever, Joel. I love how you created new stories out of the old stories.
It was fun to do them.
Well, and it feels so deeply Jewish as people of the book to sort of reassess and redefine. It's like Torah scholarship through these cards in a way.
Yeah, that's been a through line of my work, is using text ever since I did those, like that pear that we talked about.
I love it. Okay, so speaking of text, I want to we're going to close out with something that I was just so taken by, because you told me that this final piece that we're going to talk about is actually called boggle, as in the game. Apparently, you and your wife have played boggle almost every day of the pandemic, which I find so endearing because I love boggle. So tell us about this.
Well, boggle is a word game, and if you play it, it's really, really easy to play, but you end up having a list of words. And so each of us has our own list, and I would take this is my list of words after a couple games of boggle, and I would look at it much the same way I looked at those catalog cards, and try to find something in it that inspires me to paint. And so, for example, on this particular list of words, I found the word tree, and so I illustrated a tree. And so that's what I've been doing. I have been doing, you know, I have a whole like wall full of these. Each one has one simple drawing on it that blends with words. And so I thought it would be nice to show this particular one because of Tu B'Shvat.
I love it, Joel. You've inspired me for Tu B'Shvat, and I have all kinds of ideas for exhibits we need to have next.
Thank you, Laura.
But really, thank you. I mean, for the Tu B'Shvat inspiration, for being so honest about how your own family and growing up has informed your work. This has been really, really interesting. So thank you for being with us today. Of course, for all of you out there, if you have enjoyed this conversation, please know that JLive only exists with generous community support from people like you. So please consider making a donation. And Joel, thank you. Happy Tu B'Shvat, and we'll talk to you soon.
It was great being here.
More to
Thank
come.
you.